podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Because every situation is unique, you should consult with a qualified legal professional for advice specific to your circumstances. If you need legal guidance, please reach out to an accredited attorney or contact us to schedule a consultation. Hello, and welcome back to the Veteran Benefits Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Candie Rodgers. She is an attorney at our firm, ProVet Legal. She's been with us for about a year, and she is a military spouse as well as an attorney. So, Candie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in veteran disability law?
Sure. So I spent 20 years as a military spouse. So I've always been very invested in the veteran community. My husband is still active duty Navy. And so, I really feel a strong passion for helping veterans. I've seen a lot of veterans and their families struggle, in my 20 years as a military spouse and especially with VA benefits. And so when I had the opportunity to join ProVet Legal and actually work one-on-one with veterans and help them get those benefits from VA, it just felt like I was, satisfying that passion and able to give
Awesome.
back to that community I've
Yeah.
been a part of for a really long time.
Well, we love you. I know the clients love you. The staff loves you. So it's been awesome working with you for the past year. And I'm really excited. This is your first time joining us for a podcast and hopefully not the last. Hopefully we don't scare you away. But today we wanted to talk a little bit about the VA's use of artificial intelligence, AI, in their claims processing and kind of some of the trends we're seeing, some of the stuff we're reading about, where we think some of the hiccups might be, and some maybe tricks of the trade to navigate as VA is implementing new systems for processing claims. So we've definitely seen some interesting stuff. Really, like over the past few months, I think stuff has changed.
Absolutely. Definitely I would say around the fall time frame, last fall 2025, I think we started noticing patterns that have become more prevalent in all the
Like
claims that we're filing. So it definitely seems like there's been an uptick in AI use at VA.
some good, some bad. What What are some of the things that you're noticing?
So I think with AI, right, we recognize that AI can be very beneficial. And I think it can be beneficial in the VA world because it does allow, a computerized system to go in and search records, right, put things together, maybe find things in service treatment records that may be really hard for, a human to search for. And so I think an important thing to remember is that it's not all bad. And so a lot of times, we do see some favorable, positive decisions coming from AI use. But I think sometimes we also have to remember that computers aren't perfect. AI systems aren't perfect. They get better the more that they're manipulated and that, we, use them and feed them the correct information. But I think there's a definite learning curve. And so, I do think there are some hiccups in the system, specifically with maybe how claims are being framed, maybe how the computer system is recognizing those things and inputting it, maybe some of the evidence that's being presented to the VA employees. Those are all things that I think we're starting to see as far as the hiccups go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think VA has been using technology for, well, as long as I've been doing VA law. They've had the computers and the workflows, I guess you could say, not maybe not artificial intelligence, but a claim would get triggered for somebody to do a portion of the work on it. And then when they completed it, it would get, there's automated systems that pull claims down in the order in which they're filed and assign them to rating officers and that kind of stuff. That's been something that VA has been doing for years. So what kind of things are we seeing that or that are you noticing that are kind of different from the typical just assigning workflows or that kind of stuff?
I think sometimes, one of the biggest things that we see is, when you submit a supplemental claim or you submit a higher level review and those things are being processed, sometimes, the way that you frame it on the form itself, I think AI may be taking that and trying to input it and, open those claims in the system, but it's not necessarily reading the language and making sense of it. For example, if someone's claiming a condition secondary to another condition, sometimes there's confusion there. Or we'll see that there's an open supplemental claim for the secondary condition, and somehow that first condition just got dropped altogether. Also, I think when you see rating decisions come back really quickly, but then you see in the narrative portion where it just seems like there's some contradictory language, or there's some boilerplate language that just doesn't quite make sense, like maybe a computer is generating some things to be added there, and the human error doesn't catch that part and filter it out when somebody's reviewing it. I think that's a classic AI hiccup that we're starting to see a little bit more recently.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen boilerplate language for years, and I don't know exactly what systems circulated the boilerplate language, but we'd see similar stupid denials, with bad rationale, and you're like, that was the exact same language that they used in this other case. Like, I know this person didn't write it on their own, but with the AI, I can see some of that stuff picking up pace. I want to dive a little bit deeper into. I think you kind of hit on a good point of like when we file the form. So VA has, if you're filing an appeal, and we have some episodes on here about the difference between a supplemental claim, a new claim, a higher level review, a board appeal. There is a little bit, when you're working with us anyway, there's a little bit of art and strategy that goes into how we describe what we're disagreeing with from the prior decision. So, like you mentioned, secondary conditions. Like, so if you have a back condition, for example, VA is supposed to rate your back condition and all tertiary or secondary third order effects from that back condition. So if you also have radiculopathy or sciatica, pain, like that's supposed to be included in your claim for your back. And so sometimes we see VA will rate the back and they'll forget all about the radiculopathy, even though the veteran has these symptoms of nerve damage in their legs. And so like we put in some thought into how, if we want to trigger them to look at those additional symptoms, is that part of where you're seeing VA mess it up? Or
Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's as simple as you have a form and you have certain blocks. And if you put too much in the blocks, AI just doesn't know
Mm,
what to do with it, right? So then it gets very
yeah,
confused. And so part of it is determining how you frame it and where you put it on the form.
yeah, no, I think that's a great point too, because we've sort of switched our strategy a little bit in
Mhm.
what information we put on the form itself versus what we put in because in the past we've had issues where if we write a whole brief explaining what VA's errors were, sometimes VA's system would automatically label that as third party correspondence, and the rating officer, the decision review officer would just ignore it because it wouldn't be flagged for them and they wouldn't see it. And so we'd put as much information about what VA got wrong on the form itself. Can you explain to people who might not understand like how VA processes claims or how their AI system is working, why putting too much information on the form might be messing up the AI system, or what you're
Yeah.
seeing in that
So
regard?
we try to, like you said, limit what goes on the form itself, and, any other evidence, kind of put that on a brief, or, additional things that we submit so that it is separate. I think it's just an information overload, right, with the AI system, that it hasn't quite caught up yet. And so I think that's part of the problem. And that causes the claims to be misconstrued, claims to drop, claims to be designated as something else. And then, we'll get a call from a veteran, and we'll be in VBMS, and we'll be looking at something, and we'll say, this definitely is not right. There, something happened. Our team's very proactive. That's one of our core values. And so, we're in VBMS and we're actively checking those things. So we're able to get those things corrected many times, moving in the right direction before, a negative rating decision hits because of an AI mistake. But we know that, the veterans, especially who are doing this on their own, don't always have that access and may not always know what happens.
Yeah, I don't know that I've talked about VBMS on prior episodes, or for people who are joining us and this is their first episode listening to us. It stands for Veteran Benefit Management System. Um, And can you explain a little bit about what our access to that is and what we do in VBMS and how we kind of catch some of these VA errors by logging into VBMS?
Sure. So it's really the, like you said, the veterans, the system that they use where they track all of the claims. There's a streamlined process that will tell us who it goes to, what they're doing, whether exams are being ordered. We get a lot of information through VBMS, and it's really meant too for the VA employees to track those kind of things and to be able to track those claims and input information so that they know where to go with them and what to do. But we're able to see that as well. And that's not something that, if someone's unrepresented and they're doing this themselves, they don't have access to VBMS. They're a little bit blind to that part of the system. And so we're in there every day. And so we're able to see, if we're checking a claim, if we're checking someone's file, we're able to see what's pending. We're able to see what documents have been uploaded. We're able to see what exams are being scheduled. We're able to see the CMP exam, the DBQs that come back and the opinions that come back and, kind of the direction that they may be taking based upon those documents, which really allows us to be very proactive and, to jump in and submit evidence if we feel like we need to, or to prepare for the next steps if we feel like we need to.
Yeah, no, I know we've definitely seen bad CMP exam where the person, the client comes back to us and says, the examiner was antagonistic to me or something, or, you know, said that they didn't see a diagnosis, even though I know I have a diagnosis for this condition and VA diagnosed me with it. And then we can go in and discuss with the client whether it's worth getting some private records if we want to re-upload something that, or put in a letter flagging VA to look at the stuff or disputing the exam. Yeah, I think having access to that allows us to sometimes we can even reach out to individual employees in VA. I know we've gotten mixed reception depending on who we reach. Sometimes they're like, just send in forms. Don't talk to us. You're not supposed to talk to us. And sometimes they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. We did screw that up and we established a claim for something where you were just trying to highlight what evidence we should consider or something. And we created a whole new claim for that, or we didn't create a claim for something else. I think we're seeing some VA kind of kick back some form saying the wrong form was used when it wasn't the wrong form. And that's always been a little like, there've always been mistakes, but have you noticed an uptick in that?
There's definitely been an uptick in that portion. I think specifically when we are, challenging an initial evaluation, an initial rating on a condition, and, we're arguing for a higher rating based on that initial evaluation that was given. That is a very common one where they kick it back and we are able to, very quickly see that and get in and provide the guidance that, they're supposed to follow under those conditions. I think it's sometimes it's just a misunderstanding, a misreading of the form and how we filed it. And so, that's a benefit of having that VBMS access. That does seem to be a very common kickback that we're seeing lately.
Yeah. Have you played around with VA recently rolled out a new system when we upload documents, and I don't know if they've uploaded something similar for veterans who are self-represented when they upload documents called a verification. It's a verification button or a verification feature. And they have their AI scan the form and see if we missed fields or if the form is filled out, if we have the right form, if it's filled out correctly, and kind of flag issues before early on so we can fix them when we're uploading them. Have you played around with that system or what have you seen with that?
I have used that. And I think that's, one way where, like I said earlier, AI can be very beneficial, right? And there's some great pros to using AI. And I think that's one of them. I'm glad to see that they're implementing that because I think it will catch things, maybe blank places on the form that really needs to be on there for them to be able to process it. So hopefully that does catch some things, allow veterans, if it's, if they're using that on their end, on their portal, who are submitting things on their own to catch those mistakes. I think it allows us to do that as well. It does take a little bit more time if you use it because it does flag things that, like a country, that they won't necessarily kick it back if you don't write USA in the address, but they'll flag it for you that it needs to be filled in. So I think makes it a little more time consuming to submit things, but I do think it is a nice feature. I'm glad to see that VA is offering that to hopefully prevent some of those kickbacks in the future.
My initial reaction whenever VA uploads or rolls out a new system or a new feature or something, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to go wrong here?
Right.
And then you catch yourself. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think it is. Have you noticed a change in the timelines for processing claims or for the different kinds of claims
So
since
we
VA started using more AI?
Yeah, so we talked about this as a firm wide. The four attorneys sat down and looked at the timelines across our cases. And what we found, at least, from the last few months, that, the higher level reviews seem to be pretty consistent at about 4 months, give or take. But the supplemental claims we've seen really speed up in time frame. And again, it's fact dependent, right? It's claim dependent. Some are going to be on the longer end of the spectrum. I know we used to tell clients between 6 to 8 months to expect a decision once we file a supplemental claim. We just recently, like I said, went through all of our, claims and filed appeals to see what the average was. And, we really found it was probably more between 2 and 4 months. Again, it doesn't mean something might not fall outside of that window, but I think that's a pretty good general.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of changed our estimates and our strategy in terms of whether we advise to do this kind of appeal or that kind of appeal because we're factoring in what's the fastest and most efficient way to get to the highest rating with the earliest possible effective date and to get VA to correct their errors. And there's a huge difference if we're talking about waiting 8 months or more sometimes versus on average, it's probably just going to be a couple months. That appeal lane becomes a lot more appealing, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I know I've seen some articles and we can put some links in the notes here about VA potentially using AI to scan claims for evidence of fraud. Have you have you seen them? I don't think they've rolled it out. Have you seen anything?
Not specifically that I can pinpoint that's what they're doing. Um, and again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? But again, there's going to be hiccups. One of the potential hiccups I see happening is, they're scanning things for fraud that are going to pick up abnormalities that are not fraud at all, right? And so some of our veterans cases are going to get flagged and, they're going to be stressed out about that and rightfully so when there's nothing fraudulent about it. So that does worry me a bit that there'll be that learning curve with that rollout.
Yeah, and so what depends on people's trust level with the government, which I think with our veteran community tends to be relatively low. But what they're saying now is that they're using that AI to kind of help identify those the claim sharks and the companies that are pushing out repeat fraudulent disability benefit questionnaires or opinions. Um, and so they're looking for things like if the examiner was more than 100 miles away from the veteran, is that evidence of fraud? Um, I mean, I think if they're doing a knee exam and they have to get range of motion, or if they have to, palpate your thyroid or something, and you're more than 100 miles away and you don't live out in the sticks and you need to drive 100 miles to see a doctor, like I can see that being an issue for fraud. I'm concerned that if they use it as a blanket reason for fraud, telehealth, I mean, there's so many things that are, you know, based on reported symptoms or based on an interview with the veteran? What kind of conditions do you see that distance might not matter?
Yeah, so I think the big one for us is, mental health. A lot of the mental health
Mhm.
evaluations are done telehealth. We have a lot of, migraine telehealth appointments because all the supporting evidence is, migraine logs and lay statements. And then there's an interview about the severity of the symptoms. Those are really big ones for us that I would be concerned because again, that's common practice with, the mental health exams and with the migraine exams that they are a lot of times telehealth, which is very convenient for the veterans too. A lot of our clients who have the mental health symptoms, part of their mental health symptoms is they don't want to leave the house. Like it's hard for them to leave the house. And so those
Mm.
telehealth evaluations allow them to have a thorough comprehensive exam but feeling comfortable not leaving the house. So if those things start being flagged because of that, that would be concerning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, again, VA is saying that they're not gonna use it to deny veterans' claims. I'm rolling my eyes. I don't fully believe I believe their intentions, but I don't fully believe that they're gonna be able to say, "No, we're only focused on these exam companies that are violating medical ethics or, giving false exam, creating false reports for people that they haven't examined just to get a portion of the back pay or something," which we can get into the whole unaccredited representative issue on another episode. But yeah, that I I do think that they were going to go back and look at kind of retroactive stuff for veterans, and there was advocacy about it, and the veteran community spoke up. And I'm seeing that as a trend that when you guys speak up, whether it's organized through DAV or VFW or calling your congressional representative or writing letters, that suddenly VA is kind of pivoting. Okay, yeah, we didn't want to do anything that's hurting veterans. We're just trying to go after the fraudsters. And so if they cast too wide of a net, I think veterans and advocates like us are the safety net to kind of keep VA in check.
Absolutely, and I think it's important. I think it's important to speak up and voice
Yeah.
those concerns.
One of the other criticisms about the use of AI, especially for reviewing prior claims that I've heard, is that it's unclear what, if any, notice VA is going to give veterans that their file is being re-reviewed. Do you have thoughts on how that might play out or what kind of concerns that raises?
Yeah, I think definitely concerning. I think there's some, due process concerns there with the notice. I think, even now, I don't think veterans are getting clear answers to know, if they're running pilot programs or which claims are being run through pilot AI programs. I think we have an inkling, right, when we get a decision in a week or 3 weeks that something's going on that's speeding up the process. I think there's some due process concerns there. I think there's some accuracy concerns too of, you know, we may be speeding up the process, but is the process accurate? Are we getting more accurate rating decisions? Because yes, we want to speed the process up, but we also need to keep in mind we also want the process to be accurate and provide the right ratings and provide the correct decisions based on the evidence submitted. So I think that's a portion of it too to keep in mind, as well as transparency. Veterans should be able to know if their file is being run through a system and what VA is doing. I think there needs to be that transparency piece, and I don't think that's clear right now.
Yeah, I don't think it's clear. I mean, I'd like to assume that VA is going to use versions of AI that are internal and are not exposing code, or even if it's aggregate data from veterans to public sources like Claude AI or ChatGPT or something like that. But I don't know that the government's use of AI has been consistent. And again, like you said, it's not transparent. So we don't know what version they're using. We don't know if they have handwriting recognition. Do you want to explain a little bit about handwriting recognition and like AI systems that, the privacy
Yes.
stuff.
So it definitely is tricky, right? A lot of our veterans who served before they started using, the computerized medical records have handwritten medical records. And so some of that is very difficult to read. So, part of the concern I think is, like you said, the privacy concerns. So what AI systems are they using? I don't think they're going to put it out in the public sector either. But how good is their handwriting recognition software on the internal side? I know that, some of the bigger AI systems in the public sector, they can, sort of read handwriting and I'm not talking just about medical records, but if you, write a sentence and you put it in there, mess around with, can it interpret my handwriting and what I read? But I don't know how good the VA AI is in interpreting that. And I think for a lot of our veterans who have those service treatment records where a majority of that is handwritten, it becomes a little bit more tricky.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky for us sometimes using our eyes to say,
Right.
does that, you've got medical shorthand and then you've got bad doctor handwriting and then you've got old records with, shoddy photocopy. And sort of,
Right.
does that say right knee or does that say hearing loss? And
Yes.
the two things are totally different, but sometimes the handwriting, we're trying to distinguish it. So I have some mixed feelings about using AI because it might do as good. Some versions I think could do as well or better than humans in deciphering stuff. But if we don't know what they're using, there's some versions that aren't picking up any handwriting. And if your main records are handwritten,
Right.
is VA telling some rater that the AI system has confirmed that there's no evidence of this? And then even if you have a human making the decision, I mean, I don't think we even know how many decisions are generated by humans versus how many, or if they're generating decisions by AI. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I have not. So I think you're right. I think,
I don't think there's transparency on that part.
mm-mm.
And I think, we can keep demanding transparency, requesting transparency as the veteran community and support of the veteran community. But that's something that's concerning. I mean, I think it's the direction that we're heading as a society is moving towards AI. I applaud VA for getting on the bandwagon of implementing AI because I think without it, I mean, there have been claims pending for years and years, and it's hard to go through tens of thousands of records to find that needle in the haystack record that shows that you had a treatment for something on a certain date or it might be multiple records of like how often have you treated, is there consistency in treatment, is there consistency in symptomology over the years. um so I think using AI can, like you said, I mean, I think it can have a lot of benefits, but it's without the transparency, it's concerning. um do you know, are veterans able to opt out of having their file be reviewed by AI?
As far as I know, no. I have not seen
Mm.
anything where they're asking, where we're even aware that it's being run through AI. So unless something's coming, I have not seen anything that allows veterans to opt out.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either. So final thoughts about what people can do. I mean, we can't opt out of it, at least as of right now. So what are the things that are most important to be aware of or to factor in, or things that are going to influence decisions and strategy in filing appeals that you'd want the veterans to know about?
So I think first is just to realize that, VA's using it. They're definitely using it. So just being aware of that, really being aware of how you're framing things on the forms and on your supplemental claims and on your higher level reviews, you know, being very clear so that VA doesn't get confused. And the computers, even though they're trained to be smart, right? We think that computers are trained to be able to take all that information and spit it out. they're not always, and they still get confused. And so we just have to be be diligent about that and how we're framing things. But I also think, on the other side, when, you see rating decisions come out and something just doesn't look right, the evidence listed on that the rating decision isn't quite right. Something's not labeled correctly, or, you see something in the rating decision narrative that just doesn't make any sense, or your claims aren't framed correctly when they issue that decision. I think you have to keep all of that in mind and how AI may have played a role in that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that that's important. If something doesn't make sense, I mean, the system is supposed to be user friendly. It's supposed to be that veterans can access it on their own and upload stuff on their own. And I know VA's giving more notifications to veterans than they ever have before, which is sometimes awesome and sometimes just adds more confusion when those auto-generated notifications are worded funny or dropping a claim or something. But if they don't have access to get into the system, I mean, I think it does, depending on the claim and what's going on, if you're getting something that's confusing, I think that's a really good time to reach out to an attorney, an accredited claims agent. Some VSOs will have access to that, but kind of depending on their level of understanding on the appeal structure, the claims processing structure, working closely with somebody who is able to access VBMS and see what's going on is going to, I think it's going to become more important than it has in the past.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Candy. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope that we have you back to talk about more trends that you're seeing and talking about specific claims and stuff, because you're definitely seeing, you've got your hands on a lot of files and you're seeing a lot of important stuff. And I think it's really helpful to share with our audience. And we'll put the links to some of these articles in the show notes. And if you found this information helpful, I hope you guys like and subscribe and share any comments that you have in the comments section, and we'll do our best to get back to you and reach out. And um, awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Until
Thanks for
next
having
time.
me, Rebecca.
Thanks, Candy. Bye.